and I wanted to thank you guys for showing up. Believe it or not, this is an extremely lucrative career field, and there are lots of vacancies, but I think many people are scared off by the discussion of cybersecurity because they think it's very, very complex and therefore too complex for them. But I think Chris and I can both attest to the fact that any skill that you learn, so long as it's something you enjoy doing, you can learn it. You can learn cybersecurity. It just has to be something that attracts you and interests you. Go ahead and try for it. Go ahead and try for it. So this morning, I wanted to talk about the latest thing that I saw in the news that I thought deserved our discussion, and it's called Ransomware as a Service. The most recent ransomware that you guys can remember, do you remember the Colonial pipeline issue that occurred recently? Let me just go to that slide and we'll take a look at it. The Colonial pipeline ransomware attack, which halted petroleum shipments to the entire U.S. Northeast, was apparently made possible by a breach in a single unused VPN account that hadn't been configured with two-factor authentication. Now, for those of you who have not learned about two-factor authentication, David, are you familiar with two-factor authentication? I'm sure you are.
Oh yeah, most definitely.
Okay. If you think about it, and I'm using my federal ID card as an example, you put in your card, and that's one factor, and then you enter your PIN, and that's the second factor. So the three main factors are what you are, what you have, and what you know. So if you say a login and a password, those are both what you know. So that doesn't qualify as two-factor authentication. That's only a single factor. You know the login, you know the password, therefore it's not two-factor. You have to bring something with you for that second factor, what you have. So that's why two-factor authentication is so important, much, much more secure, and as demonstrated here, it was one account in the entire Colonial pipeline system that had not been enabled for two-factor authentication. They did some research and they found that that account password was reportedly circulated on the dark web. In other words, places where people do things like that. And 1 week later, the ransomware demand appeared on Colonial employees' computer screens. So they're speculating that from the time the account password was made available on the dark web to the day of the attack, which I think was April 29th, was 1 week. 1 week. And here's something that I found very interesting. The industrial pipeline operations networks, in other words, what we would call industrial controls and critical infrastructures, were not involved in the attack. The attack involved the company's business systems, like where their email was and where their network accounts were stored. Had nothing to do with their industrial controls. So the challenge we have now, and this is what the federal government is struggling with, is how do you define a critical infrastructure? If you can down the employee's computer network system that they use to manage the industrial control systems, it's just as good as getting into the critical infrastructure. So they're having a great big conversation about that now. What defines a critical infrastructure? So that's going to be an interesting conversation. But anyway, let's move forward. We're going to start by talking a little bit this morning about whatever as a service. And then we're going to talk about the ransomware as a service model, give some examples for ransomware. Well, this is literally as a service examples. And then talk about the revenue models. Literally, there are revenue models for this, and the reasons why all of this increases your company or your organization or your agency's risk. And then we're going to talk about whether a company or an entity should consider recovery or prevention as being, their major source of where they put their money. And then there are a number of prevention approaches that were put forth by one group, and I'm going to put them up on the screen, and we'll talk about them. So, first thing, let's discuss as a service, whatever as a service. Can somebody tell me what you think of when you think of blank as a service, something as a service? Anybody? Chris?
As a press the unmute. Anything that's as a service is continuous. It's always there on demand, and you pay a certain money for it, a certain amount for it. The thing that comes to my mind is I'm currently learning Microsoft's financial model, and they have what's called an operating system as a service, where Windows 10 is always there, and as long as you pay a certain fee per month, you get the updates to that operating system every 6 months or so. You get the special features that the operating system has. You develop something new or a feature update, you get that feature update monthly. It's pretty much a on-demand subscription. You pay a certain fee, and you get things back in return. And I'm trying to avoid the service, because it's as a service there. That's what I'm trying to think that's what's going on.
So that's literally Windows 10 as a service. Okay. That's operating system as a service, but it could also be software as a service. There are many, many other descriptions. Infrastructure as a service. For example, I run a website out on the internet, but the website that I obtain is through another provider. I did not purchase a server and put it out on the internet and connect it through an ISP. I just dialed up somebody that provided infrastructure as a service and said, I want a server. And they said, okay, pay me this much money per month. Poof, you have a server. And that's how we did it. So there are many, many things that now are being offered out on the internet. And so the line between what you need to buy and what you need to just rent or lease is getting really blurred. No longer do you have to go buy a server. What's that, David?
I said, or you don't even have to develop anything yourself. You don't have to have any of the knowledge. You can just, I know this is way off in left field, but I know folks that don't know how to drive, don't own a driver's license, but can Uber and basically drive from one place to another.
No, I think you're right on track, David. Why do you need to know it or own it when you can just pay a short amount of money and get it for a while? You know? But you're right. The Uber business model is basically you don't have to drive, we'll drive for you. And it is so prevalent, you know, people driving people, that it's not identical to what we're saying here because it's not actually a cloud type service. But your point is well made. Why do you have to, you know, do this when somebody can do it for you? So yeah, that's a very good one. The main definition that I found about this It says something being presented to a customer, either internal or external as a service, always in the context of cloud computing. So, and there are two main things that have driven this. One is cloud infrastructure. The cloud itself has become so prevalent, so common across everything that we do. You can now use the cloud just as if it was something you owned. You can put stuff out in the cloud and sell it. You can, for example, how about a storefront as a service? How many of you have thought about becoming an Amazon or a Walmart affiliate? How many of you have set up your own store on Etsy and sold things that you make by yourself? So the actual storefront is just provided to you. All you have to do is plug in, you know, this is how much I want for this, and this is how to contact me, and they do everything else, including credit card transactions. You don't have to do any of it. You just start an account, you know. So that's what is driving it these days. So here are some noteworthy, you know, whatever as a service examples that I could think of. First one, GoDaddy. What's so big about GoDaddy? Anybody? Or is it just me that has a GoDaddy account? Yeah, website as a service.
A website hosting service.
Yep. You don't have to own a server anymore. You just dial up GoDaddy and say, I want to buy a server. And they're like, okay, $25 a month. Poof, you have a server. And they do domain registration as well. One-stop shop. So here's another one, Dropbox. Storage as a service. Now also with, you know, when you think of Dropbox, you also think of Google Drive and you think of Microsoft OneDrive, because they're both storage as a service as well, but they're part of other suite packages. But storage as a service. You don't have to put it on your hard drive anymore. And it's extremely easy to get to and convenient. I can access something on my smartphone or my laptop or my iPad, you know, the same stuff. I don't have to, you know, carry a thumb drive around between the three. If I want to have particular files I get to, I put them out in the cloud and I get to them from anywhere. Here's another one, Amazon Web Services. And that includes the business services. You don't have to run your own shop front. Just contact Amazon and they'll do it for you for a small monthly fee. And Microsoft Office 365 OneDrive. And last, believe it or not, Microsoft Azure is considered to be a platform as a service offering. You don't have to have Azure servers anymore. They'll do all your authentication and everything through Microsoft Azure, which is a cloud-based service. So, you know, the as-a-service model is becoming extremely prevalent. So, of course, the bad guys are doing it as well. The RaaS model is described as a business model used by ransomware developers in which they lease ransomware variants in the same way that legitimate software developers lease software as a service products. Now that's frightening. So they literally have 4 different revenue models for this. How can you get ransomware as a service? Well, one is a monthly subscription for a flat fee. Another is affiliate programs, just like Amazon affiliate programs. Monthly fee model, but with a percentage of the profits also going to the operator. In other words, it's sort of a cost sharing or a profit sharing model. One is a one-time license fee with no profit sharing. You purchase the license fee, and whatever you can do with it, you get to keep all the money. And the other one is pure profit sharing. There are ransomware as a service providers out there that basically say, we'll show you how to do it, you go out and do it, and we'll take a portion of your revenue. They call it revenue, but it's literally ransom money, ransom payments, and they'll take a portion of your ransom booty that you get. So this has become big business. And I was reading an article from a few of the providers, and they say that ransomware providers out there on the dark web are offering this for as little as $100. So the question, it begs the question, why does this escalate your company or agency risk? So let's discuss that. Why has the risk now increased?
It's like you're exponentially multiplying the number of people that are willing to try to attack your company with it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So there are now, and back in the days, Chris and I used this phrase before, when you talked about intrusion attempts, there were a group of people that would download things like John the Ripper and use it against somebody else without really understanding what they were doing. But because that software suite was left out on the internet and freely downloadable as open source software, John the Ripper could be used by anybody. And we had a term for that we called script kiddies. Kiddies. In other words, they weren't mature enough or intelligent enough to do it themselves, but they were certainly smart enough to download it and aim it at somebody like, I don't know, I'm drawing a blank. Denny's.com, they didn't care whether they made a mess of your company, but now they're doing it as ransomware. So there's actually somebody out there saying, we're going to sell this to you and you could make millions. And what's the other main reason why? Number one, it's cloud services, but what's the other main reason that is considered to be an incentive for ransomware operators? What is an incentive? Besides the, lots of money you can get and you don't even have to write the program.
It's now easy to access.
I'm sorry, Farsane, say that again.
I said criminals want to make some $1 million in any way, and whatever, they can do it, they would do it.
Right. But you have to remember, you're right, but you have to remember one thing. In America, when large sums of money are moved around, they are subject to scrutiny by all of the banks and all of the financial institutions who are required to report it to the federal government. So the problem you run into is if you, do a ransomware against, Toys R Us, and they send you $1 million and they deposit it into your, credit union account, your credit union is going to report that.
They have to.
They have to. It's the law. So the other half of this equation, making it so interesting for people to try, is the inception of cyber currency. Because cyber currency is not federally sponsored. It is not part of any financial institution. And it's traded out there as a commodity like gold. You know, if somebody pays you your ransom in gold, you don't have to do anything with it. You can hold on to it and say, I now have that ransom. Well, it's the same thing with cybercurrency. Cybercurrency, like Bitcoin, is not trackable. So, and nobody's required to report it. So when you have a ransom that can be paid in cybercurrency, and I think all of the ransomware models use it, you now eliminate or greatly reduce the chances of getting caught.
Unless if you have a Swiss bank account.
Yep. The discussion about Swiss bank accounts, though, I've heard that even Swiss bank accounts are being pressured into divulging some information because they are literally being used, like you said, Farsane, they're being used to finance criminal operations. And you know, the international financial community is in an uproar about Swiss bank accounts. But you are correct. They used to be entirely anonymous, but that's sort of changing. Go ahead, Chris.
I find Swiss bank accounts to be interesting. With the right amount of motivation and pressure, you can tell Swiss bank officials, hey, these people are doing some really nasty stuff. If you're holding that money, you're involved with this really nasty stuff. Right. I'm going to use the acronym CSAM. CSAM, for those who don't know, is child sexual abuse material. If you're holding money for child sexual abuse material, Swiss bank accounts will sing like a canary. If you're just trying to overthrow a nation, they could care less. They don't want to be involved. And they'll say, sorry, that's private. We don't want to be involved.
Right. There is... Go ahead.
May I?
Yes.
In when I'm thinking about it, because it used to be in a part of my old job, that why do I go to a Swiss bank account? God forbid if I'm the criminal. Now I can go to Nigeria, have an account there, give them a percentage, and Nigeria is so infamous that if we all remember that I'm the prince and I'm in the jail, go ahead and give me $50,000 in return. I give you $5 million. And how many people they bought into it? So yep. Nigeria, Ethiopia, you name it, Chile, I don't know. There are so many places. And Christopher was right that they're going to go grab the Swiss bank account that say, hey, that's international issue, blah. But what about all of these sub-criminals all over the world?
Yep. Yep, you're absolutely right. And they're all on...
I have to clarify something.
No,
my
that's
friend.
Fine.
But you're good.
Sorry, I have to clarify. I used to be an investigator, slash a criminal investigator, slash a detective for about 26 years. And the only way that I could solve a case, which I had to solve case after case after case, was to think like a criminal.
Right.
And then I could solve the issue. I can think like a criminal how to achieve the goal, but I'm not a criminal. I cannot even touch a butterfly. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
But I have been trained to a great degree, but that was just my 2 cents. And I apologize. That's my first time. I'm excited.
Yeah, that's great. And I think what is occurring that is sort of changing the landscape these days is many governments are passing laws that basically say that if you are providing the capability for somebody to break a law, then you yourself are partially responsible for that law being broken. And I'll give a great example. I worked a number of years ago for an internet provider, an internet company. And the challenge we ran into is that the federal government, on a number of occasions, asked to audit the records for the internet provider because they had a warrant for somebody, and the internet provider was not allowed to say, I'm sorry, we're not going to do that, because they could consider you to be an accessory to the crime. And I gave the strange example of Safeway. When you go into your Safeway store and connect to the Wi-Fi, if you then use that Wi-Fi to go, rob a bank, literally, to do an unauthorized transaction, let's say, Safeway can and has been included in the lawsuits because they provided the access for this person to do it. Now they've got that great big, you've seen this when you go into the public networks, they've got that great big disclaimer. And what's the one thing that can be said about that big disclaimer? Always. Nobody reads it. So that's the problem. They can put up all sorts of warning banners that they want, but that still doesn't stop them from being considered responsible if somebody is using their networks, for example, or in the case of the Swiss banking system, their bank, as part of criminal operations. Governments are actually saying that, you bear partial responsibility and we will hold you accountable. So, no longer is that strict insulation available for groups like Swiss bank accounts. There are cases where Swiss banks have been, told and have agreed to divulge client information. So to get back to the escalating risk, the two main things that drive this are, number one, it's cloud-based, so that you don't even have to own the servers or buy the software. And number two is the use of cybercurrency, which greatly reduces your chances of being caught. So you are absolutely right, David. Exponentially, your risk has increased, because now anybody with $100 and a desire to, do something bad to your company or organization now has the ability to do so.
Got a question, but not necessarily needs to be answered now, just something for us to think about. Okay. I'm wondering how much these technologies like Bitcoin and Dogecoin are going to be trackable in the future. Because I've seen YouTube videos, some popular IT cyber people who can go in and say, hey, I can click on the link, check the ledger, and say, I can see how many times people have donated to this. So I wonder how much time will it be where it's not going to be anonymous anymore.
I agree, but unless the governments decide to federalize these things, in other words, to capture Bitcoin and make it part of the Federal Reserve, it's going to be exceedingly difficult. But just so you know, China is developing their own cyber currency, and it will be a state-sponsored cyber currency, sponsored by the government of China. So there are some interesting things coming up. But I will tell you that on at least one case, I heard how they tracked a ransomware provider and ended up taking them to jail. And that was at the moment the money moved from it was something like $90,000 was the ransom that was paid. And what they did was they watched all of the banking systems for a $90,000 deposit. And they found that, a couple weeks after the cybercurrency ransom was paid, somebody put the money into their bank account. Well, why do they do that? So they can spend it. But now look at what's happened with folks like Elon Musk and Tesla. They now say they'll accept cybercurrency for cars. So you don't even have to put it into a bank. You can actually spend your Bitcoin somewhat anonymously. Now, of course, the federal government's going to get into it with income tax and capital gains and all that sort of thing. They're going to, make you, when you buy a car, you're still going to pay taxes for it, but it no longer has to come from your bank account. It can come from your cryptocurrency.
I'm satisfied with that. So move along. That's another topic.
So the big question that comes up for every provider is, do we spend our money on recovery or on prevention? Because both of them require money. Recovery is like Colonial Pipeline did. They paid the $4.4 million ransom. So it took $4.4 million out of their bottom line just to get back to operation. Or do you pay for prevention? People like you and me, and systems, and defense in depth, and greater tools, and those sorts of things. Where do you put your money? Do you try and prevent something that may never occur? Or do you say, well, gee, I think I'll wait for it to occur and then take a black eye at the time? Well, sometimes a ransomware attack will literally bankrupt your company. It will make your company insolvent. You will no longer be able to do business. It's a balance. You've got to make that decision. As the provider, as the CEO of the company, you have to make that decision. Do we wait and pay the ransom? Which just encourages, by the way, when somebody comes and submits you to a ransomware attack, that is no guarantee that after you pay the ransom, they're not going to hit you again. And it's also not a guarantee that when you pay the ransom, they're not going to give you the key to unencrypt your files anyway. Ransomware is no promise. It's not a business deal. You're dealing with criminals. You're dealing with criminals. Yes.
If I may, what about if the ransomware happens to something that is not an easy thing, such as a hospital, or something that is a part of the public health? What about that then? It's not just that you pay the money and they fix it. So of course prevention is huge, and of course recovery is also huge. Yes. But prevention, so it's not always just, the gas line that it went through that issue, and all of the lines, all of the south part of America, the gas didn't get there timely, and when you calculate the loss, it is in billions.
Right.
Loss of time, loss of work, and so on and so forth. But what about they do something such as, I don't know, such as a virus, and they just say we're gonna or something that was gonna kill masses of people,
right?
And buildings, they're gonna all remain. What about that then? What about things that I don't know what we call them? They are the futuristic terrorism.
That's right.
And now that they can do it with this cyber something, God forbid,
Yep.
we are still paying for the Corona big time, and we have to keep our mouth shut until further notice, because it is something that I hated. That's all I can say.
Right. Right. There is a third possible option with recovery or prevention, and that is, and it's getting big these days, cyber insurance. People are actually paying insurance providers who will help if you are attacked by ransomware. I did a very quick review through it. The issue is that it's more appropriate for smaller and mid-sized companies because the limits of their insurance typically are about $100,000. So big companies, insurance would not work for them. You know, in this case, the Colonial pipeline, they paid $4.4 million, much more than an insurance company would have covered in terms of corporate liability for Colonial.
Scotty,
so, yeah,
I have a fourth option proposal, and I'm very curious to know if it's ever going to happen. When will it turn into, hey, you gave me a bloody nose with ransomware. If I find out who you are, I'm going to send my red team after you, and the red team's going to make your life a living HE double hockey stick.
That you raise a good point, but of course,
I'm just thinking that because a lot of the circles are talking right now, saying, when are we going to respond?
Yeah.
Because all this is defense. First off, all this is defense, and I have some circles will sit there and say, if you keep doing the same thing over and over again and expect different results, there's a definition for that. It's insanity.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
When are we going to turn the tables back and say, hey, you did this to us, we now want retribution?
Right.
But Christopher, this is not a personal revenge. That's the job of the government in any country. U.S., Canada, I don't know, all of them. It's not our job that we go and give them a bloody nose.
Easy to say.
Do we have an army? Who are we?
Very easy to say.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's very easy to say. My issue is we have some very smart CEOs and millionaires who have staff around them with technology, who have the highest degrees of technology staff.
Right.
What's going to make them? Let's say someone attacks the wrong person. Theoretically, let's say someone decides to make Basil's day a bad day.
Sure.
Or I'll make it even better, Musk.
Right.
What if someone decides to want to give Musk a bad day and decides to drain his accounts and do what not to him? What prevents Elon Musk from saying, hey, I'm going to turn my red team, I'm going to find out who it is, and I'm going to turn my red team against you?
Yep.
I think that's
Christopher,
the issue.
your story is something like that is a good idea for a Hollywood scenario for a movie. It doesn't happen in North.
I don't put it past Musk to do it. I wouldn't.
Right.
I think it's entirely possible.
I mean, I'm maybe portraying him as a Bond villain, but I think it's a real scenario to think about.
Right.
He just sits there and gives the governments the middle finger and say, I'm gonna go rogue.
It can entirely be personal in that sense, but what I don't know is, can you figure out exactly who the individual is?
Right.
I mean, how much time, energy, resources have to be directed at finding out who it is first? I mean, you can have all the guns in the world, but if you don't know who to point them at, or if you go after the wrong person, we even have, state-sponsored, the Russian have state-sponsored hackers. Would Elon Musk go after the entire country of Russia? I mean, that's a can of worms.
It is.
Yeah. Yeah, you literally lay the groundwork for what we know of as cyber war. You know?
Yeah.
Good discussion, though. So let's move forward. We've only got a few more minutes. I wanted to finish off with some of the group CrowdStrike came up with recommended prevention approaches. And, you know, as they put in their article, you can implement some or all of them. You know, any of them are an improvement. But just what do you think the number, it's going to be last on this list, but what do you think is in every recommendation for prevention? Every one. What do you think one of the big recommendations always is going to be?
Training your
no loss
employees.
of human life.
I heard it, David.
Training your employees.
Training.
Mm-hmm.
Because remember this ransomware occurred on one network account. One individual user account that hadn't been set to multi-factor authentication. So we'll get to it. We'll get to it. But training is always, you know, where you start. Your people have the ability. Well, what was it? The WannaCry ransomware. At our organization, we have, you know, tens of thousands of people on our networks every day, and it only took 6 people to click all the way through all the warnings that said, hey, are you sure you want to open this? This comes from an external source. This probably shouldn't be trusted. Are you sure you want to do this? And, you know, warning after warning after warning, and 6 people clicked all the way through and said, yeah, go ahead. Yes, 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 yes. And encrypted over 175,000 files for my agency. All it takes is 1. We had 6. But yeah, the point is, if your customers can bypass many of your own security controls.
Mm-hmm.
So here are some of the recommendations. Reliable and modern endpoint protection. In the DoD, I remember they have something that they call rogue detection, and that's literally every workstation in every network that is a .mil network watches all the other workstations in that same network. And if anything near me looks like it's acting weird, I report it. So these computers are literally watching each other. So endpoint protection is not just on the one computer, but it could be on all the nearby computers as well, because DoD has done that for more than 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Here's another one, regular and frequent backups. And it says, if your backup is only performed every weekend, a ransomware attack could cost an entire week of work product. So more frequent than once a week. Here's another one, make multiple backups and store them on separate devices in different locations. Back in the day, when you used to have to make business file backups, you were required to store them off-site. If anybody remembers that, if you ever ran a business and you did your backups, you couldn't keep your backups in the same location that your business was. I remember seeing an old, they went out of business, but it was a commercial dairy down in Waldorf, Maryland. And they had the great big administrative building where their office was and all of their stuff was going on for the dairy. And then outside the back door, cemented to the ground, 15 feet from the building, was this big lockbox. And that's where they kept their tape backups. It was separate from the building, but it was only a few feet away, and you could get to it with a key. But that was considered off-site. So the point here is, if you do make backups, let's say you're trying to protect your Amazon Web Services data. Don't put your backup on Amazon Web Services. Put it somewhere else. And they also say test your backups regularly to ensure that you can use them. Here's another one. Maintained. I'm sorry.
I said maybe daily.
Yeah.
For the backup.
Could be daily. Yep. And then the next one, rigorous patch program to protect from known and unknown vulnerabilities. We had and we did this early on in this group, and my wife floored us all. We said, if you can do one thing, to increase the security posture of your organization, what would it be? And we came up with all sorts of great ideas. Oh, increase customer training, buy more tools, and, all sorts of things. Hire, more SMEs and that sort of thing. And my wife, she was literally walking past me, behind me, and she said, make sure everything's patched. And we all went, of course. Make sure that everything is patched. Many of us think of patches as being automatic, but they're not. Make sure the patches are applied when they're supposed to. You guys remember with the, I don't have it here, but Apple's most recent upgrade, I think it was 14.6, iOS 14.6, addressed 3 zero-day vulnerabilities. People who said, oh, I don't have time to do that, they are now vulnerable in at least 3 different active attacks that are going on Apple devices. So no, you have to patch. It doesn't matter if it's an inconvenience. You must patch. Next one, they say segment the network to hinder proliferation. You literally start thinking about, well, if it's going to hit this portion of the network, how do we keep the rest of the network from being affected? So one of their suggestions is literally firewall your network off from your other portions of your network. Internal firewalls. Possibility. Anti-phishing protection. You do that up on in your mail servers usually. And last, user training and build a culture of security. People these days can no longer say, well, that doesn't affect me. That's my company, or that's my bank, or that's my where I go shopping, or whatever. You can't do that anymore because you have literally dozens, maybe hundreds of accounts that you now log into so that you can use your frequent purchase card and get discounts. Remember? If you're at Safeway, you have an account with Safeway that you put your phone number in there, and that helps you to get cheaper gas. But that account is tied into Safeway.com. So you can't say that's Safeway's problem. No, it's also yours. You can't escape it. We are now so tied together that nobody can say that's not my problem. So, David, you spoke to me and said you don't have cybersecurity experience. You're getting it right now. And part of that is understanding that you play a part in the solution as well as your inactivity plays part in the problem. So you will always hear me saying, have you guys patched? Have you guys done your iOS updates for your Apple devices? The latest thing from Microsoft, you must patch your Windows 10 systems because we don't want to be part of the problem through our own inactivity. So you start getting really cyber smart just because it's happening all over the place. So we're out of time. Anybody have anything else to bring forward? Yeah, Chris.
Oh, the patching is easier said than done.
Mm-hmm.
We can sit there as security practitioners, tell your companies and your bosses, patch it, patch it, patch it. You then have the scenario where you have a group that relies on a software that it can only run on Windows 7.
Right.
And you have these very interesting conversations about, well, can you find new software that can work on Windows 10? Yeah, but it costs how much money?
Right.
And you get into these cycles of conversations. I'm just saying that you don't want to run into a meeting buck wild and say, patch everything. You have to work with your customers. And it goes back to the CIA triad, the confidentiality, integrity, and availability. The availability will always ruin your best intentions with being a security practitioner, because you have to make it constantly available while protecting them, while making sure you know who they are.
Yep. There's always a tug of war going on, always. But I remember hearing a conversation with our assistant secretary where somebody, I think it was the cyber guy, whoever his name is, I forgot, where he literally went to the assistant secretary and said, we have people that are, thinking that they're too busy to patch their iPhones, and this is going to cause us tremendous difficulty, and we may end up, if somebody attacks us like they have been attacking other groups, we're going to end up on the front page of the New York Times. And the assistant secretary turned to this guy in all seriousness and said, who do I call? Who do I force to get their act in order on this? Who do I make comply? Because I am more than willing to do so. Literally up to and including the secretary and the assistant secretary or the deputy secretary. It doesn't matter. So if you've got a sponsor for that sort of thing, then you can get serious with everybody. If you've got a high-level sponsor who says, you're right, we must do this. So that comes back to us. We have to convince those C-level executives of the business need to do these things. We have to convince them of the business need before they end up getting hacked with a ransomware, and they call you into their office and say, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you protect us? And, at that point, it's an academic discussion. You're now trying to work on recovery. So, yeah, it's an ongoing thing. But you know what? That's why there is such a call for skilled, intelligent white hats. And just so you know, David, have you heard of white hat versus black hat or gray hat?
No.
Okay. White hat is somebody who does cyber work, if you will, only for good intentions. In other words, I work for a company, and that company, hires me to keep the company safe. There are also black hats, which are out there that are, in it to get the money or in it to down somebody. Some of them are politically motivated. They could be state-sponsored, whatever. Those are considered black hats. Then there are also gray hats, and script kiddies sort of fit into that field because they will do malicious stuff for fun. They will do it just to see how far they get. Or it's a white hat who's off work and, trying to make a little money on the side or whatever, hone their skills by trying to go, hack into Avon.com. Well, those are called gray hats. I'm trying to say that in this program, the CS-Sensei, I want everybody to know that you can learn and be effective as a 100% white hat. I refuse to train gray hats. I refuse to train black hats. You've got to sign, if you ever want to refer to us in your resume or you want a reference from me or Chris, you have to sign a, what's it called? An ethics agreement.
With ethics, yeah.
Yeah, code of ethics. We've put together a code of ethics that basically says we are all in this for good reasons. We're not just smart. We are smart and focused on being part of the answer, not the problem. You know?
Okay.
So just so you know, we're not playing around here. We want you to be a champion for good. We want you to be somebody that, you know, the news industry is going to interview because you stopped a multi-billion-dollar cyber group or something like that. Yeah, we want you to be the heroes. We want you to be riding the white horse. Okay? Make sense?
Yes, indeed.
Cool. Okay. Well, I think we're out of time here, but I'm going to stop our recording.